The national drug strategy is a large integrated approach that involves health, it involves treatment, information, education. It also involves my colleague, the Solicitor General, on the enforcement side. We have got to shut down illegal grow-ops in this country. They're a huge problem. They fund organized crime. And we just simply have to do a much better job on that side.
McClellan.
I think he was down there. He was wanted them to try it out to see if they would agree with it. And he came back with a big smile. No, seriously.
We're sending a tape to this, to John Ashcroft.
I'll do the drug thing. I mean, we have a working relationship, and we work with them on drug issues, so it's important to make them aware. And in the States, there are 12 states who have decriminalized as well. So it's not like it's just happening in Canada. It's happening in the States as well. And
yeah, but try telling them that. I mean, the thing is that they're playing all high and mighty, and you Canadians are letting everything go to hell in a handbasket. But I mean,
yeah, and it's not like we're making it legal. I mean, it's not going to be legal. It's just that we feel for the resources are put more into enforcement and going after the guys that grow it and distribute it, that we'll be better off.
Pourquoi ne pas contrôler?
But a Senate committee recently reported it could find no strong evidence that pot led to harder drugs. The vice chair of a Commons committee looking at pot said Cochon could have waited to read the reports.
These are details that have to be worked out in the House of Commons. These aren't details for some obscure little minister trying to get political hits on the Canadian public, just blurting out the fact that he might decriminalize.
You know, Peter, I think the whole thing is just incredibly suspicious. First of all, the minister has had months and months to put together an overall drug strategy. He's had the committee's reports for what, several months now. So I just find it quite alarming that, you know, he goes down to Washington one day to see Mr. Ashcroft. You know, maybe Mr. Ashcroft wanted some amendments, and the minister now has to come back and run around and put in some amendments. But, you know, I think it's really quite absurd what's going on, and all the indications were that this bill was going to be tabled tomorrow, including some measures around a drug strategy. All of a sudden it's called off when he comes back from Washington. So I think we do have to be suspicious about it, and I think that in this country we have a right to deal with our own legislation. It should be before Parliament. I mean, there's been an issue even about why the minister has been going to Washington when he's about to table a bill, and why there's been so much information available about this bill in the media, and it's not yet been tabled in Parliament. So I think the whole thing has gone awry, and this minister should really be, you know, kind of called up, and you know, he is the Minister of Justice. He should be putting this legislation that he's promised repeatedly before Parliament, and here we are waiting again. Why is that? Is it because Mr. Ashcroft didn't like what he saw?
Yes, indeed. John Walters, the drug czar from White House in Washington, D.C., came this afternoon to the Vancouver Board of Trade at the Wall Centre luncheon. But we had a table of 8 there: Chris Bennett, David Mommelbean, Dana Larson, myself, and people from the compassion clubs in Victoria and Vancouver, and we booed and we hissed and we caught him in his lies, and we yelled out lies, propaganda, and we rattled him. The guy gave a terrible speech. I mean, not just terrible to us, but terrible to everybody.
The war on drugs took on some friendly fire today when a major American player came to town. U.S. drug czar John Walters was in Vancouver to speak to the Vancouver Board of Trade. This is a man who is known to be critical of Canada's so-called soft position on drugs and opposed to drug reforms in general.
The drug consumer in the United States is the single biggest funder of anti-democratic forces on the right and left in this hemisphere.
Not everyone agreed with today's tough message coming from the U.S. White House.
In the last 2 years, for the first time, we had more teenagers seeking treatment for marijuana dependency than for alcohol, which never used to be the case because of the greater availability of alcohol.
There's 3 million of us here who smoke pot, and none of us need treatment. We want to force 3 million people in jail for treatment.
Such reforms are very much in the plans for Vancouver, so when Vancouver's outgoing and incoming mayors heard about his visit, they weren't amused.
Somehow I just haven't been able to come to grips with marijuana being that devastating a drug. We don't see that here, and I don't know why we why we don't see that here and they see it so clearly there.
They've got an armed camp going on in the United States, and if we don't want Canada to be like that armed camp, we have to take a separate path.
It was as if the White House director had timed his visit to coincide perfectly with events in Vancouver. The city intends to tackle its festering drug problems with a 4 pillars approach: prevention, treatment, enforcement, and harm reduction.
I ask you to seriously consider what the United States would look like if there were 55 million drug users or 110 million drug users. You're entitled to your own opinion. You're entitled to do whatever you want, speak whenever you want, but I don't think you're entitled to your own facts. We all wish, I know contrary to the caricature, for more effective medicines to both cure disease and to relieve suffering. I wish, frankly, that smoked marijuana had met the standards of medical science. There's a con going on in parts of my country, and I will not speak about here. And that con is to use people who are suffering and dying for political purposes. And I think that is shameful and immoral.
Mayor, he says if we move forward, we might end up with more users, more addicts, and more casualties. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that for one moment.
I don't necessarily agree with all of his views, but I think that we should be looking at it and taking it for what it's worth.
What drug czar John Walters made clear today is that he's not trying to tell Canada or Vancouver how to run its drug programs. However, he says any country that's soft on drugs should look closely at the huge problem in the U.S.
They arrested and charged 40,000 people in New York City for marijuana.
Has anybody ever solved it by having a war? Never. No, it doesn't matter where you go, it's never been solved. Can we possibly make it any worse than it is? Is that possible? I don't think so.
Is this an issue, in your opinion, given all the meetings you've had with Canadian officials and will have again next week, that could, in your opinion, redefine, in a way, the relationship between these two countries and how things unfold across those borders?
No, I don't think it's going to redefine. We're friends. We're going to remain friends. I think it's a little regrettable. We've dealt with kind of marijuana and drug legalizers in the United States. Some of them are linked to groups I know that are operating in Canada. It's been difficult. I've gone out and we defeated them at the polls last fall in the states where they try to have ballot initiatives. I think it's unfortunate that these kind of drug legalizer fringe people are causing as much disruption and threat to the free movement across the border.
If some Americans have a burning desire for the pot they're smoking in Vancouver, it may be because President Bush's drug czar keeps telling everyone it's the most potent on the planet.
The problem is that Vancouver, in the guise of kind of progressive opinion, is victimizing increasing numbers of young people and being a staging area for increasing legalization not only in Canada but in the United States.
Now, the impetus for our interview was actually a recent Canadian government report which showed marijuana use has doubled in the last decade.
And yet 30 to 50% of 15 to 24-year-olds are trying it all the time. I mean, there's an issue here of respect for the law. Doesn't the law need to take this into account?
Sure, and we think what we do is, what we're trying to do here in the United States, countries will make different decisions. What we're trying to do is have proportionate sanctions. That the growth of high-potency marijuana has exploded in British Columbia, and 2 weeks ago it was briefed by Canadian officials. It's moved to Manitoba, to Ontario, and Quebec.
U.S. drug czar John Walters says Canada's lax attitude is turning British Columbia into a smuggling hotspot. His office reports marijuana seizures along the northwest border have tripled over the past 3 years. But Canada is still flooding the U.S. with what he calls BC bud.
Know that high potency from Canada is not. This is the crack of marijuana.
About his pot, highly potent BC bud from Canada.
British Columbia bud, which is shipped for the most part down to the United States.
There's a $5 billion marijuana production industry going on in Vancouver. It may be one of the largest employers. It's obviously large. It's also extending to movements of marijuana in across ports of entry that are on the eastern part of the country. The RCMP informed me that many of the organizations, some of them ethnically based Vietnamese organizations and others that are doing the grows in British Columbia are now moving groups across Canada to Ontario and Quebec to begin to supply larger parts of the United States.